These are the words for the wind for the weekend of July 4th and July 5th, and I want to read you the gospel, and then I'll give you some words, and then I'll give you some information. The gospel text assigned for today is, "At that time Jesus said in reply, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and Lord of earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to the childlike. Yes, Father, such has been your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Sounds nice, and we like that kind of, Jesus likes us and all this sort of thing. But what precedes it is a little bit different than that. What precedes it, Jesus is pretty worked up. He says, to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children who sit in marketplaces and call to one another. We played the flute for you, but you didn't dance, and so we sang a dirge for you, but you didn't mourn. For John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking, and you all said he is possessed by a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they said, look, he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is vindicated by her works. He's on a tangent. Then he began to reproach the towns where most of his mighty deeds had been done, since they had not repented. Woe to you, Chorazin, and more to you, Bethesda! For if the mighty deeds done in your midst had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would long ago have repented in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And as for you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? No, sirree, you will go down to hell, to the netherworld. For if the mighty deeds done in your midst had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. And then he launches into what I said was the gospel assigned for today. At that time Jesus said, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. For although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to the childlike, and, take my yoke upon you, and so on. So Matthew didn't intend for his gospel to be parceled out the way the lectionary editors do. You got to try and deal with that whole thing. You got to deal with a Jesus who's frustrated, tired probably of the inability of people to understand what he said, and he's not a very happy camper until he gets down to that point where he walks through places of great suffering. Sodom was a place of great suffering, not for the connotation that political evangelical Christianity wants you to have. Sodom was a place where there was not hospitality to strangers, where aliens and immigrants were not welcome. That's why Sodom was burned with bitumen and hellfire and so on. And Tyre and Sidon were lands along the coast. They were, dangerous places where dangerous people lurked, at least in the eyes and minds of the conventional religious establishment. And so it's only when Jesus reflects on those places and the prejudices and the biases and the limitations that are represented by those places that he gets his act together and realizes that his role is not to be the one that goes out and condemns and judges and that sort of thing. His role is to keep his wits about him, remembering that he's the Son of the Father, that these things, you learn in humility, you learn in vulnerability, you learn in trust, you learn in honesty. how the Son chooses to reveal the Father to us is not actually very clear. There are those, of course, who want, fireworks and miracles and apparitions and all that sort of thing. And, some people believe they get them. I don't, but that they want to believe it, more power to them, I guess. I just simply think that because nothing comes into being except through the Word, when we talk about, that's the beginning of John's Gospel, that we need to pay attention to the discreet and surprising and consoling and healing moments in our life that don't come with a lot of fireworks. They just happen to unfold in a peaceful conversation with a friend, a quiet time, or even a time of great stress and frustration and anger, as many of us find ourselves in these days with this virus. That in spite of the what's going on the surface of our hearts and minds and feelings, I believe that God is working in a deeper way. Christ works in a deeper way, revealing our true and best self to ourselves, where we can rejoice, we can be different than just angry and mad and irritated and deprived and victimized and those sorts of things. And that's hard to do. God, believe me, I'm no patient person. It's hard to do, but the gospel says, that Christ is revealing. He's loved by the Father, and he reveals, but he reveals not in power and majesty. He reveals in strength and discretion and gentleness. I suggested at Mass this morning in the homily that in all the Masses this weekend, and I've said it all along, that I wish the Church had taken this opportunity, and we still have God knows what time ahead of us, to take this opportunity to deal with some serious questions. Not be in such a hurry to get back to what we do, but think about what we are and what makes us what we are. And the questions I suggested are, I think we need to have an honest conversation about why innocent people suffer. Why is there suffering the innocent? Why do we find it so easy to, treat the land and the air and the water and other creatures with such, callous disdain sometimes? I mean, I feel bad lately now if I go after a mosquito. I know that I'm not going to be a tree hugger and stuff, but I just think that the church could take this time, and the church is us, it's not just leadership, it's us. We could take this time to reflect on why does innocence suffer in this world? The virus is not morally responsible. The virus just is a virus and does what viruses do, but it's causing a great deal of suffering. The callous disregard for public health is ultimately, it's pretty evident in Florida and Texas and California that disregarding the advice of public health professionals is going to lead to more suffering, and that, can we alleviate that? Do we contribute to that by our personal choices that we can make? And I'm not laying guilt. Please don't. I'm just saying we could think about this. Why is it so easy for so many people to be concerned about the unborn, but have great difficulty with those that are born? And the innocent suffering of those that are born. Just look at the city of Chicago these days with those murders, those little kids. There's no simple answer. You can't come up with some conclusion that, I don't want to get into it, but that, this, that, and the other thing, how we talk about they and them. But why does that suffering exist? Why are people so disposed to hurt those I think are questions that we should talk about or think about and read about. And then that leads to another issue, is why, if we have a God that we believe is all good and loving and, likes the childlike and wants to accompany us, yoke himself, this God wants to be yoked with us if we're burdened, and in this world, with all the evil and the suffering and the violence, how can there be a good God? Those are questions that people are asking, and I think the church needs to not presume we know the answer. And then that leads me again to, what is God's plan for creation? God is, obviously I do not believe God causes suffering, initiates suffering, wants some people to suffer at the expense of others. I don't believe that. I don't believe the plague is a punishment for whatever people want to blame it on. That's part of nature. But what is God's plan? How does God's plan for flourishing and fruitfulness unfold in a world with so many indications of human limitation and failure and human cruelty and human violence? How does that work? How do we become part of that? I think that's the kind of question that Matthew wanted us to ask. I mean, he has Jesus in a very complex framework of narrative there. He doesn't start out being the gentle person. He starts out pretty angry and pretty ticked off. And what's the process that Matthew unfolds there? And I think the key to it is when we recognize the full extent of suffering, our own perhaps, but many of us who watch this video don't have the kind of suffering that other people do. What is it about suffering that can either transform us and make us transmitters of goodness, beauty, truth, love, or can not transform us so we become transmitters of more suffering and pain? All that being said, the 3 masses this weekend were fairly good. You can watch them. I think they'll be posted on our website and Facebook page. And as I expected, half of the people invited actually chose to come, and I think there's good reason for that, because of the alarming news about the continued spread of coronavirus, that people are cautious, and that's wonderful and fine, and they should be. So beginning next weekend, you don't have to have a reservation. We're going to call the people who didn't get called for this capacity issue this weekend, but you can come at 4 o'clock, or for the 4 o'clock Mass or the 10:30 Mass. Don't come much before, a half hour before, so don't come before 3:30, because we still need to process you in, and we will cap the capacity at 100. So if we reach 100 people, the doors will be shut. And that's what they're doing at the cathedral in Chicago, Holy Name Cathedral. They haven't had to do that, I don't think, very often, but that's what they're going to do. I don't think we're going to have to do it, but don't get mad if you come and we have to cap the capacity at 100. And masks are still required by everyone, social distancing. The seating is marked out. You can sit where the orange tape is on the pews, but you can't sit where the signs are indicating that it's to be left vacant. And if we have problems, we'll try and adjust them. So please be patient. And as I said at Mass today, and I said before, once we figure out how we do this sanitation and make sure that we're doing it right and it's working, we may be able to add a second Mass on Sunday morning and still have the time between the Masses to properly sanitize the space. But so beginning next week, you can come to the 4 o'clock Mass or the 10:30 Mass. If we reach a capacity of 100, the doors will be shut. And it's not to be mean, it's simply because we have to follow the protocols. You can come to the next Mass. But please, you have to be fully masked and follow all of the other procedures that are in place and required by the Diocese of Gary. Have a pleasant afternoon, and peace be with you.